you have some of the best people on that score in the world here this afternoon to talk about it. It's simply a world-changing concept. It starts by going into communities, as you will hear. You go into communities and you ask them, what do we have? Not what do you need, how can I do it for you, but what do we have as assets here, whether it be our businesses or our salt pans, whatever, our trees, whatever, it's our associations, it's our education, it's our schools. What do we have? Now let's see how we can use what we have to get where we want to go. So it's a completely different approach, and you're going to hear about that today and hear why I believe firmly, after 13 years of supporting microfinance in South Africa, why in fact we need to start with that question, that ABCD approach, before we do almost anything else. So that's why we're starting there today. So Sebastian is going to give the presentation on that for about 15 minutes. He will then guide his panel members who will take the time, Gord Cunningham from the Coady International Institute, who taught that course to Sebastian and myself 2 years ago, Bernie Dolly from Acala Trust from Port Elizabeth, who's been involved in these sorts of exercises for I think about 20 years, Bernie, your whole life, and Corné Tunison. We're delighted to have you, Corné, from Rustenburg. Corné is now with Mpula Community Development and also has run workshops on this sort of thing for a long time. Now, I'm hoping the panel members will actually take note of what Sebastian is saying, and if you want to raise things that he hasn't raised, or make your comments about what he says, then do that. So Sebastian will speak for about 15 minutes, and then the panel members will go, let's say, for 20, and then we'll have lots of time for question and answer. And before I hand this over to Sebastian, I want to make it clear again that all of you, we're counting on using, we need all of your brain power, we need all of your skills at these round tables. So if your name wasn't called out, a lot of you came this morning for the first time and we didn't have your names in our database. It's not because we don't want you here that you're not assigned to a table, it's because we probably don't have your name there. So join a table that interests you with a business that interests you. All right, I'm going to step aside and welcome Sebastian Matthews. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you. Thanks, Marta. I'm not going to speak for 15 minutes. I'll just talk for 5 minutes and hand over to the real experts in the field who are sitting here, and they will share with their experiences. Is that okay? Okay. So what this whole thing about asset-based community development or finding the strengths in a community, it's really the difference between what do you need versus what you have. Okay? If I ask you what you need, you're going to give me a long list. It's going to depress you and it'll depress me. Okay? And you're going to expect me to somehow fill your need. I'm not going to. Okay? And so you get upset with me. If, on the other hand, I asked you what you have, suddenly you start thinking of possibilities. You start thinking of ideas. You start feeling better about yourself. Right? You start becoming encouraged. I feel better, right? And we both go through this mutual exercise of building each other up and having great ideas and linkages, etc. So that's really what this is all about. How does this help you when you want to franchise a business? Well, you want to be working with communities that are thinking that way, that are thinking of possibilities and opportunities. You want to be working with entrepreneurs, franchisees who are thinking that way, who are not thinking of all the needs that they have and what they don't have, but what they do have. Is that right? You can say yes. Okay. Sure, I'm thirsty. Can I have water? Think of those as assets, right? We have a whole bunch of assets, and sometimes we allow them to just leak out. So let's look at a common asset. The most common asset that we often think about is money, right? You have a lot more than money, but let's look at money. Let's look at how money kind of leaks out. And I'm going to do an example with you. I don't know the answer. Okay, so it's like a real consultant doesn't actually know the answer, but you're going to give me the answer. Okay. Khayelitsha has how many people? How many people live in Khayelitsha, more or less? 2 million? Okay, I looked on the website this morning. It's a bit out of date. The last, there was a 2005 survey done, and they said 490,000. So that's a while ago. So I'm assuming it's gone a lot more. Okay, 6 years later, exactly. Can we say 500,000 people? It's probably not right. It's probably a lot more, but can we say 500,000 Cape Townians? You tell me. 800, I hear 800. Do I hear a million? Do I hear a million? Do I hear? Okay, I've got a 5. I hear a 8. Do I hear? Okay. Let's say 500,000. Let's say 500,000. Is that okay? Nice kind of safe average number. Is that okay? Okay, now, how many people per household in Kailicha? In a shack, how many on average? How many people? 7? Okay, I hear a 7. I hear a 10. I hear a 5. Okay, I've got between 5 and 10. So let's say on average, ma'am, 7. We have a winner. We have 7. Okay. Is 7 okay? Kind of a good average between 5 and 10 around there, right? 7. Okay. So we've got 500,000 people. We've got 7 people per households. Is that right? So how many households in Kailicha? Okay, now the grandmothers know the answer, right? It's a funny thing. Whenever we do this, the grandmothers just tell you the answer. The kids are going, Okay. I know there are lots of young people here, right? Okay, because Matsidi just said, divide by 7, right? Why is it the grandmothers know how to do this? It's amazing. Okay. So, all of you, take out your mobile calculators. Okay, everyone take out your mobile calculator. Now, I actually don't know the answer. Okay, everyone take out. So, type out there 500,000. So that's 500,000 people in Kailicha. Okay. Are we all doing this? I want everyone to do this. Everyone, take out your mobile calculator. Every single person. Honda folk with the cool bikes, take out your calculator. Love your jackets, love the bikes. Very cool. Okay. All right. 500,000. See, this is good for you guys because this is market sizing. We are doing market sizing. This is what Vodacom does. This is what Trevor Manuel does. Okay. He might not have a cell phone, right? He might not do it on his cell phone, but this is what he is doing. This is what Praveen Gordon, when he charges you taxes, right? This is what he does the night before. Okay? He's on his computer and he's doing this exact same thing that you are doing. Okay, he might have a few more zeros, but this is exactly what he's doing. Okay. Okay, so I have got, thanks, yes? Okay, so it's a big number. I've got 71,428 households. Is that okay? Fantastic. Brilliant. See, the grandmother's always the fastest on it's amazing. Yeah? It is amazing. Okay, so I have 71,000 some odd households. So let's make it easy. Let's say 70,000 households. Is that okay? All right. This is exactly how Praveen Gordon does this. The night before the budget, he is up at night doing this. I can assure you, right? Well, maybe not him, maybe his whole team around him, but this is what they're doing. Okay. 70,000 households. Let's assume that in every household there is, well, since we're speaking about older folk, I don't want to say old people because they're young at heart, right? We can see that. So let's say in every household there is one grandparent. It's always a grandmother. They're amazing that this, it is incredible, right? In South Africa, it's always Ma. Grandmother is at the, so there is one grandmother in every household. Let's say, as an assumption. Is that okay? So, how many grandmothers in Kailicha? Okay. There are 70,000 grandmothers in Kailicha. These are your biggest assets. Young people, make sure your grandmothers live long. Right? Let's see how valuable your grandmothers are. Okay? They're worth more than money, but I just want to show you okay. What is the grant? The old age grant, the grant that your grandmother gets every month. How much is it? It's about 1,010, right? 1,010 rand, is that right? Well, let me ask your grandmother, you would know. Okay, well, you're a successful businesswoman, so you don't even need... How much? 1,000? 1,060. Okay. Now, this is thanks to DSD. Okay, so Sadi is... she's playing a key role here, right? So she is ensuring that you, the grandmothers, are getting 1,060 rand every month. Okay? In the Eastern Cape.
Well, thanks, Sebastian. Maybe what we should do at this point, I've been promising everybody a dance that was taught to me by God. And I think we all need to just get up, just so we can just kind of freshen ourselves up a bit. And it's called the fruit salad. More assets in South Africa. So I'm going to just demonstrate from the front, and you're just going to follow me, okay? Just give yourself enough space. And it goes like this. God, will we do it together? We normally do this well together. After one or two glasses of wine, it's even better. Okay, so it goes watermelon, watermelon, papaya, papaya, peel a banana, peel a banana, fruit salad, fruit salad. And you've got it like So if you remember nothing else from what I've said, you will never forget me for the fruit salad.
Okay.
So here we go. Watermelon, watermelon, papaya, papaya, peel a banana, peel a banana, fruit salad, fruit salad. So with your permission, I'm going to sit down and do my presentation. I'm rather tired now after that. Thanks, Sebastian, and thanks for the opportunity to speak here today. And mine's really just going to be hooking very much on this morning's presentation. And I was completely inspired by Sadie from the department. And I thought, yes, I couldn't have said it better. In that, in the years of work that I've done, and I work in the Eastern Cape, just forgive me, I'm out of breath. I'm not nervous, I'm out of breath. My years of work in the development field, and that's my core business. I'm a community development worker, I've always been that, and started a number of initiatives pioneering different things. I have, and related to what Sebastian has just done, seen so much money just come in and pour out in communities. And it's tragic because it's just, I just don't know what it is. And I got tired, and we're a donor, so that makes it even harder. When you've actually got a resource of money to give to something good and you see it wasted. Now remember, we are not-for-profit donor, which means I've got to work damn hard to raise that money and then see that money go wasted and pour out the bottle like Sebastian just did. And so a couple of years ago, Gordon and I met, and we were starting to question our approach to development. And what we find increasingly, not just in the Eastern Cape, wherever we go, and I spoke last night to colleagues of mine, and I've been talking around the world to colleagues, and it seems to be in this country right now, and as you were saying this morning, we're finding that it's not the resource of money, it's actually the disability, the inability we have to actually think and feel and do those things you were talking about this morning. That there's a very, very low self-esteem, that there is an element of dependency that unfortunately the grants have created. And so all our efforts as development workers are it's fruitless because people are not wanting to dig deep anymore and go back to traditional practices. And we talk often in Ikala Trust about working on poverty of the mind and the spirit, and the stomach sorts itself out. Sounds very simple, but it's loaded. And we train people specifically around how do you shift that mindset from I'm useless, I'm poor, and therefore I'm a liability, to yes, I can, and I will, and I must. And in that way, my efforts will be recognized. So that's basically what Ikala Trust does. And we've been working with Cody and many other practitioners. And increasingly in the Eastern Cape, certainly, I'm part of many fora at university level where academia is saying, we're teaching people, but it's not helping. You know, we teach them and they go somewhere else. They're not staying. They're not empowering others. It's all about ourselves. We've forgotten about what about Sebastian next to me? What about Corne next to me? We become very self-centered. So what eColor does, and we call it asset-based citizen-led, because we've got to bring that voice back again. We've got to unite people around a common issue. And for me, and I'm really amazed to see so many young people here, because in the 9 years we've been around, I never dealt with young people. Increasingly, they're knocking on our doors and saying, help. What can we do? We've been to university, we've got all these degrees, but we can't find work. What opportunities are out there? So I'm inspired by people here who have tried to create businesses. But I'm saying, that's all good and well, but what is the multiplier effect? How do we get that granny that I deal with in Laborde, in Bizana, in places that are remote and removed? How do I bring them back into the system? How do I support what they're already doing? And our slogan is start with what you have and build with what you know. So let's go back again and look at how did we survive, as you were saying, before 94. We don't think anymore. We don't train our kids to think anymore. So our relationship goes back quite a while. And in 2007, Cody linked with eColor Trust through university, the graduate school actually. And we did a very, very big exercise, a case study in Janssenville in a community of 6,000 people that before government got involved, that community of 6,000, it's a farming community, mobilized their own resources and were vibrant, the very things you talked about, safe. I mean, when we spoke to the police captain, he said, ma'am, there is no crime here because we look after each other. We care for each other's stock. We don't steal. He says, I've got 2 or 3 cases and maybe there would be a little bit of domestic violence, but gender-based violence. Other than that, we don't. But the minute government came in and the grant system, all that, we stopped caring. We actually stopped caring about each other. And we wrote the case study up, and we're going back to actually review what has happened there, because that was 5 years ago. And what money actually did, aside from the things we're talking about, because money is one thing, but your relationship with money is a different thing altogether. So our job and the purpose of what we do is really all eColor does, and we're inundated with me having to speak at many different fora around how do we begin working at this level of the mind and the spirit, where people have become despondent, they're despairing, they are mental illness in my area, 1 in 3. We're dealing with emotional stress, we're dealing with depression, suicide has risen, teenage pregnancy, gangsterism in my. How do we deal with all these negatives? People's perceptions of themselves have changed. They don't feel valued. The only reason I'm valued is if I've got a BlackBerry. I don't even know how to use one because it's all about trends and peer pressure. How do we go back to basics and be human again? So very much part of our work is around working at those 2 levels. And we have seen dramatic change in people that were told all their lives that actually they weren't worth anything. And when they've gone through a process with us as an organization, you just see their confidence rise, and they're able, through confidence, make those choices of whether I choose to stay where I am or I enable myself to kind of move on. So really that's just what we're wanting to show is the money and all of those things are great. But on its own, I have very wealthy friends, but very unhappy. Broken homes, relationships that can't be retained. But it's not, we always say it's not, money's not the root of all evil, it's the love of it. And my increasing worry is increased poverty. Terrible, where people have not, communities I visit, people have not eaten for days. You feel guilty. But my guilty also triggers anger, and my anger triggers action. That's the, I don't fight. I get so mad, and so the departments in the Eastern Cape know me. And we always say we don't really want to take money from the departments because eColor works very responsively. And if we find a good project now when I'm in the field, we fund it now. We don't wait till I get back to Port Elizabeth. We make a decision there and then to actually support something. So we cut the bureaucracy out. So funders don't like us because it's too risky. Guess what? All of your stuff is risky too. But a community can't wait for 6 or 8 or 10 months for a grant to be approved. If they have a good idea, we support good ideas. And we only support what exists. We don't create work. That already says something about the communities we work with. In that already, if there's a garden, the first thing for me is, if you're growing your own vegetables, it says something about that community, that they really care. And we'll go in and we'll say, yes, 5,000 rand. You tell us what you want to do with that. If you were given 5,000 rand now, what would you invest in? And we talk about investment, somebody else alluded to that too. It's not a grant. We're investing in what you already do. And we never go back. Oftentimes we don't have to because we trust them. They know what they want to do. And often there's all these strings attached to money. But sometimes we just need to learn to trust a little bit more and to listen to ideas that people have. So really that's just my short story. We've got an amazing website. You can have a look at it. We're about to embark on a very big piece of action research where we're trying to lift good news stories. I'm tired of the bad news. I think you feel the same. Makes me tired. I feel depressed. I feel I'm not good enough. I don't want to hear it. So I'm like an ostrich. I just bury my head. And in Eastern Cape is a difficult terrain. Aside from the political kind of scenario and environment, it's not easy. 75% of it is rural and poor, really poor, but very beautiful too. So if you ever want to visit the Eastern Cape, Port Elizabeth is just where I'm based, but it is so beautiful. And there's a lot of opportunity. But so people like myself, the role I play is really just to stop the gaps and kind of look for a Sebastian or a Cody or somebody that can help me and help others to do what we do. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, after that publication for the Eastern Cape, allow me to talk about the Northwest Province. You know, in certain circles, especially here in Cape Town and Gauteng, people tend to forget about us out there in the sticks. But Rustenburg is probably the fastest growing city in Africa. And we are very proud of that because it's an asset. And we are a very rich, we're an extremely rich community in terms of natural resources. As other mining companies close shafts down in Rustenburg, they are opening almost on a daily basis. But with that, we also see all the social problems that goes along with this growth. And it creates a tension in the community between rich, extremely rich, and I grew up in the area and I discussed this with friends the other day that when we went to high school, there would be 1 or 2 of our friends that would come from really rich families. These days, I'd say in the upper market schools, maybe 50% of children comes from rich homes. But then there's the other side to the story. All around these mines are these extremely, extremely poor communities who are directly affected by things like air pollution, water pollution. And they see the rich mining bosses coming in with their big cars in the morning and leaving. That's what they see. But what they get out of the resources that's under them, in the ground underneath them where they live, they're not getting anything from that. And that's part of that feeling of despair. And with this model of ABCD, where we look at assets, And we've seen how this approach transformed communities from I'm living in a poor community, I am poor, there's no way out, I will always be cut out from prosperity, to looking at a way of finding what the assets are around me, economically, socially, environmentally. And a good example of this was in a community, you all know Sun City, and there's the Bokobung Lodge. People are making loads of money out of tourism, and a community right outside of there said, for all our lives, we've been cut out of this. We've never shared in the wealth that this development has brought us. And we did this asset-based approach to community development in the community right outside there. And they had to identify economic assets, environmental assets, and social assets. And the group came back and they said, you know what, we've just identified empty buildings and 2 possible hiking trails. We're going to transform this into a business. Just by shifting the minds of those people, giving them the opportunity to see what they see every day in a different light. So this approach has really changed communities, and it has changed lives in our community. And I've been involved in community development for 15 years. It's my field of study. And we will never end, we will never stop growing, never stop learning. But I have come to a point where I know that this is a model that can change the face of the South African economy for the better.
Thank you, Corné. My name is Gord Cunningham. I'm with the Coady International Institute in Canada at St. Francis Xavier University on the east coast of Canada, a place called Nova Scotia. Has anybody here ever heard of Nova Scotia? Put up your hand. Wow. Obviously, the Tourism Marketing Board is doing their job. Before I talk a bit about our involvement with ABCD, let me give you a little bit of background on the Coady Institute and who we are. This institute really has a unique history in our country. It's based at a university, but it really grew out of a social and economic movement back in the 1930s, a time in Canada which was known as the Great Depression, in which commodity prices bottomed out, and this area was dependent on raw materials, fishing, forestry, and farming. And the communities in the area were hurting. A group of professors from the university got together and said, what can the university do to help? And these university professors went out into the communities and started organizing study groups, what they called kitchen meetings, in which they organized another term, people's schools on the economy, in which economics professors, instead of teaching students in the classroom, were sitting with fishermen and people who worked in farming and helped them understand more about what was happening in their local economy, what was happening in the world economy, what they could do. And then the communities themselves identified things that they could do. And actually, in the words of the founder of the Coady Institute, Moses Coady, in 1939 said, they used what they had to secure what they had not, echoing a theme that we've been talking about. So what happened essentially was, over a period of about 15 years, the economic backbone of Northeast Nova Scotia was transformed through a series of credit unions, first, that pooled people's savings. Those credit unions invested in producer cooperatives, fishing cooperatives, lobster canning cooperatives, mills, and on and on and on, to the extent that it really did lift this part of the country out of poverty in a fairly short period of time. And today, if you go down Main Street in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, where I live, the largest financial institution is a credit union. It has over $140 million on deposit from savings in a community of 5,000 people. The dairies in our area are farmer-owned. So the farmers not only produce the milk, they own the dairies that they sell it to. So the university was getting flooded with people coming from all around the world, other parts of Canada, to learn more about this experiment that seemed to be doing very well. They had no way to respond, so in 1959 they created the Coady Institute. And that internationalized this experience. So from 1959 until now, the Coady Institute has been developing development leadership education programs to initially talk to the world about what had happened in our area, but then very quickly realizing there was a lot of great experience out there around the world, we started shining the light on best practice internationally. So over 52 years, we have educated more than 6,000 graduates in 130 countries. I'm proud to say that in South Africa, there have been over 200 graduates, and some of them dating back to the late 1970s and 80s, in which we brought a lot of folks to Coady from the Eastern Cape and from KwaZulu-Natal. And then we made a mistake. 1994 happened, and we all celebrated, and we did what George Bush did a few years ago. We said, mission accomplished. And it was a mistake. What we didn't realize was that the leadership that had developed during the struggle, the kind of mobilization that Mama Sadie talked about earlier that had happened before 1994, that kind of capacity left the communities and the organizations and went into government. But what it did is it left a big hole behind at the community level in terms of that kind of capacity. So we made a mistake, and we've only just realized it a few years ago. So about 6 or 7 years ago, we started re-engaging in South Africa with people like Bernie Dolly and others, more recently Sebastian and others. So the Coady Institute has been re-engaging in a couple of ways. We offer a number of educational programs, and we've been trying to provide opportunities for South Africans to come to Canada. But we know that we can't bring that many, so we've been working with groups to try to offer Coady influence programs, educational programs here in South Africa. We offer a master's program in Canada that only involves having to be in Canada for 3 weeks, and then you can do the work at home. It's a master's in adult education for community-based development. We have a new women's leadership program that's fully scholarship, but can only handle 15 women from around the world a year, in which they come to Coady for 5 weeks, then they go off on an international placement with a senior woman leader to learn much more about their style of leadership. Then they come back to Coady for a month, and then they go home. We have an Indigenous Women in Community Leadership program in which we're working with our own First Nations communities, Métis and Inuit communities, our Indigenous people in Canada, with a women's leadership program. And we have more than 20 short courses, specialty offerings, such as microfinance, livelihoods and markets, which is really about value chain analysis, and asset-based community development, to name a few. And there's information over on one of the tables over there on all of our programs. Something has happened in the last few years in terms of Coady's relationship with South Africa. Since we've re-engaged, we have struck a chord here, particularly with our asset-based community development offering. In 2009, Bernie Dolly organized a seminar right here in Cape Town at the University of Cape Town's Graduate School of Business. About 25 or 30 people, I believe. 9 of those people showed up at Coady in September for the asset-based community development course. This year, in 4 weeks' time, we're expecting 12 South Africans in that same course. That's a lot of folks from one country when you think we might only have 40 people in a course and we appeal to people from 130 countries. So something is attracting people from South Africa to this asset-based approach. And I think I know what it is. I think it has to do with where South Africa is right now. And this whole issue of what are the rights and responsibilities of citizens in the new South Africa. You know, I've heard it this morning from Mama Sadie, and I've heard it many times, that there was an expectation after apartheid ended that now government would deliver. And that's a fair expectation. So many people who've been left out were not getting their due in terms of service delivery. But what seems to have happened is people sat back and waited, and then they got angry and frustrated. And I think the term you used, Mama Sadie, was people's mouths grew bigger, but their eyes grew smaller and their ears grew smaller. So those muscles that people developed during the struggle to mobilize and to use what they have to secure what they have not started to atrophy. And so we're in a situation where the government's in it. Mama Sadie, I feel for her. She's in a difficult position. On the one hand, government doesn't want to be in a position of looking like they're saying, you know, help yourselves, because they do have a responsibility. And you said it, it's not service delivery versus people doing things for themselves, but it's finding that right balance. What is the proper balance of what communities should do for themselves, how they can identify their own opportunities, mobilize and make it happen, and seek investment from outside? Not grants, but investment, versus the kinds of entitlements citizens should expect in the new South Africa to be provided, and that's fine. So I think we're at that moment in South Africa where that is the big question, and where this asset-based approach that we've been promoting starts to address some of these issues. To keep our courses relevant and leading edge, we don't just look around for best practice. We actually get engaged with partners in trying new approaches out. And you know, I'm happy to say that in South Africa, in places like Port Elizabeth and in Rustenburg and in various other places, we've been engaged with organizations that are actually testing out how to operationalize some of these approaches. And they've been loosely coined under the banner of ABCD, or asset-based community development, in which outside agencies that want to stimulate community-driven development, that mobilization from the outside, enter communities differently. They enter not by bringing in projects or by doing needs assessments. They enter by asking communities appreciative questions about what that community has done for itself in the past, and learning from those stories about local leadership, about the assets that communities have, and then helping those energized members of the community identify all the strengths and assets that exist. And then doing some community economic analysis, like the kind that Sebastian did, using his leaky bucket to identify economic opportunity, and then to help the communities look at what opportunities can you do right now without getting any outside help, what we call low-hanging fruit, and then starting to embark on those, and generating a sense of confidence and momentum as they succeed with the small things, leading to more ambitious activities. Now, much of that methodology that we have been promoting, and I'm very encouraged to hear the term community capacity enhancement coming out of the Department of Social Development. What you described this morning, Mama Sadie, sounds very similar to what we're doing in the asset base. I don't want to get hung up on acronyms or on approaches. We have no proprietary, we don't have a trademark on ABCD, and nor do we want one. But I think we're talking the same language, and I think we're talking about the same things. Where our approach that we've been promoting came out of a study around the world that my colleague Alison Matthew and I did, that Bernie alluded to, in which we looked at Janssenville here in South Africa, of successful communities that had lifted themselves out of poverty largely through their own efforts, without a lot of outside help. This is unusual in the development field. Those of you who are in the development field, when we talk about success, we tend to talk about our own best practice, or about replication, scale up, these kind of, we don't tend to look at communities that we're not dealing with, that haven't needed us, that have lifted themselves out of poverty through their own efforts. But our feeling at Coady was that we can learn a lot from these kinds of communities. And we have learned a lot. I mean, some of the common threads that I think we'll run through this workshop is leadership. We have, in almost every story, and we've looked at hundreds, community leaders that are able to generate a sense of pride and opportunity, and even a sense of shared sacrifice now for gain later. They're able to stimulate that in their members and motivate people to act. These community initiatives always started very small and slowly over time grew to be more ambitious. They didn't overreach and try to do too much too soon or rely on outside resources so that they became dependent. They were also able to sustain themselves over time by developing effective forms of member-based organizations. We've heard the term cooperatives used, but there are many different forms that communities have developed in order to sustain these things. We've been working not only in South Africa, we've been working very intensively in Ethiopia, which is by the UN's definition, one of the poorest countries in the world. We've seen amazing results in those communities. In Kenya, in Vietnam, and in India. What we've learned in our direct experience, including here in South Africa, is that an asset-based approach, a community capacity enhancement approach, whatever you call it, this kind of appreciative, strength-based approach definitely can inspire local people to take action. It can mobilize people to do things, and they can achieve the low-hanging fruit. What we're also realizing, though, is in order to sustain themselves and become like those success stories we studied, there are a lot of obstacles along the way. There's internal conflict, there are issues around markets, capital, technology, and we're realizing the importance of these community-driven initiatives to link with a variety of stakeholders, to form almost multi-stakeholder platforms in order to move to the next level. What does all this have to do with micro-franchising? A lot, actually, I think. Listening this morning, I heard a whole range of very interesting businesses that typify the kinds of opportunities that seem to come out of the leaky bucket analysis that communities identify. Well, the amount of work that people have to go through to realize those opportunities could be cut down immensely if there were opportunities for them to then, here's a market, we know there's an opportunity, can we become a franchisee, or can individuals become franchisees in order to do this? I can see it could accelerate the process by which these communities move up. Anyway, I see Martha giving me the signs, and we want to have a few minutes for questions. So maybe what I'll do is open it up and hand the roving microphone to Natasha, who will, and how much time do we have? I'm still on calculator mode here.
Any questions?
I'm Madison Eyre. I'm the CEO of Honeycare Africa, based in Nairobi. This all sounds very great. Sounds like impact can be very powerful. And it seems like there's a potentially very obvious connection to expanding businesses through micro-franchising. But the whole process still seems a little mysterious to me. Maybe you could give a simplified example of what the ABCD process actually is. If I'm trying to expand my small business, do I do it? Is the whole community involved? How long does it take? Maybe you could give a simplified example.
What really came to my mind in this discussion, particularly when it comes to linking the assets to micro-franchising, it's what I would like to call the leaking knowledge bucket. Because as Africans, you know, we have been socialized to neglect and undermine our own knowledge, which is actually used out there to, you know, which has made many people rich. And for the fact that it is local knowledge that most of the poor actually use as their means for survival. But when it becomes something else when you think about business. I can give an example of, you know, mabele. I don't know if you know mabele, but sorghum. You know, it's a traditional food. And the way it is now packaged, it does not even match what we used to do. But then that is actually a franchising opportunity, But for the fact that, most of us have been socialized to undermine your own knowledge and your own self, the very things that can work and assist in terms of tackling poverty and creating opportunities are the things that we undermine. If you take an example of, for example, if you go to Sandton, you will find that in Sandton, a thatched roofed house is the most expensive house. But when you go to rural areas, they will tell you that, no, you must use corrugated iron to build. And yet that resource that comes from, that was used by Africans to build before, they have been socialized to undermine it. But when it is used by the rich, suddenly it becomes, so this is just where we need to also begin to create awareness that what we actually have is much more valuable and can actually create opportunities, and then begin to take it from there.
Engos, Mesati, welcome to Kailicha. I'm Zobandu Pongolo from the Department of Social Development, Western Cape. Two questions. The first one is, what are the preconditions that needs to exist before you apply the asset-based approach, if any? What kind of a condition should exist? Can you just come into a community and apply the method, the approach? Or should there be some prerequisites so that that will enable, you see, for you to apply the approach? The second one is around the technical knowledge that an AB approach, an asset-based facilitator should have. What kind of knowledge, what skills, what information, what attributes should an AB facilitator have? Thanks.
I will do the first question. Kind of a Madison had asked where's Madison? There you go. You asked that, right? Yeah. Practical example. So we're in a little community called Matubistad in the middle of nowhere, about 20 kilometers from nowhere, near Rustenburg, which is also, it's not nowhere, but it's far from nowhere. And I noticed there are no chickens there, right? So now if you don't see chickens, that's a problem, right? Because when I grew up, my dad had chickens in the backyard so that he could get eggs and sell them so he could send me to school. So whenever I go to a place, I look for chickens. And this community, 1,000 people community, had no chickens. So we had an ABCD workshop. Corne was part of that team, and I'll leave it to her to explain kind of the process by which you initiate. But very quickly, so there's 100 people in this, under a tent on a weekday, so obviously they're unemployed, right? So whenever we have these consultations and people show up, that means that they don't have something else to do, right? But that's awesome, because they're the people who have something most at stake in the success of their community. So when you see unemployed, it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing, right? Because that's a wealth of assets, right? And that is an amazing thing. So here we are, we do a 3-day process and it's just practical tools, etc. So no rocket science. The key thing is, though, I did ask them, guys, where do you get your chickens from? Okay, so they did a leaky bucket exercise, just exactly what I did with you. And they discovered they were getting 3.7 million rand a year in grants. So forget other income, just grants alone, a tiny 1,000 people community. So not even the size of Khayelitsha. I mean, you guys are seriously wealthy here, right? You guys are like the Cape Town of South Africa. You are the Cape Town. But this is tiny Matupistad. They have tiny, tiny community and they're getting 3.7 million rand a year. But 3.6 million rand was leaking out. Where was it leaking out? So I noticed no chickens. So I asked them, guys, where do you get your eggs from? Okay. And they were getting the eggs from Rustenburg, from the town. So I asked them, how much does an egg cost? And they said, 1 rand 46 for an egg. Now this is something that comes out of a chicken's backside, right? So you are paying 1 rand 46 for something that drops out of the rear end of a chicken. Okay? Now all that, I'm not knocking Woolworths, but all they do is take that egg and they shine it and sell it back to you. Right? But that's all it is. It is still something that came out from the rear end of a chicken. and it costs 1 rand 46. So I said, okay, how many eggs do you eat as a, so now we're doing the leak, right? The leak, where's this leak? And so they calculate themselves, households, how many eggs per household per week, multiply it out, etc. Maletola was there, right? No, yeah. And when they multiply it out, so it's a very simple exercise, exactly what Vodacom does, exactly what Honda would do, any business would do, all of you do as franchisors, right? That's exactly what you do. They were doing the same thing. And when they multiply it out on their cell phones, the grandmothers obviously got the answer right first. Young kids, we've got to work on our... They calculated that they were leaking out 210,000 rand a year on eggs from the backside of a chicken. Okay? So then they said, whoa, this is a problem. Firstly, they realized they're wealthy, that they are signing a blank check to Woolworths, etc. So they're seriously wealthy. You have to be wealthy to be able to spend 200,000 rand a year on eggs, right? Because you haven't even calculated the taxi fare. You get in a taxi, you drive to Rustenburg, buy the eggs, etc. So seriously wealthy folk. So anyway, when they realized that out of that 3.6 million rand that's leaking out, 210,000 rand came from just eggs that were leaking out. So this guy, this is Joel. Joel is 68 years young. Joe has a, Natasha, it's a grade 4 education, right? He has a grade 4 education. Okay? And Joel was angry. Joel is a pensioner, unemployed pensioner. He was so angry that night he didn't go to sleep. After the workshop was over, he said, thank you everybody, and we went home. Joel went to Rustenburg on a taxi, arrived in Rustenburg, went to the CNA, bought a Farmer's Weekly. And looking at the Farmer's Weekly, he started a broiler project, because they had broilers in that issue. They didn't have egg layers, so he said, oh, no problem. He bought 100 chickens. He's selling it for 45 rand each. The Farmer's Weekly said every 6 weeks you'll be able to sell it. So lo and behold, the chickens appeared, they grew up in 6 weeks and he sold them. Amazing. Chickens do that. And he was selling them 45 rand each for 100 chickens. That's 4,500 rand every 6 weeks revenue that he's getting in. So basically in a year, he suddenly had a 32,000 rand revenue business. Even if he was terrible, which he wasn't, right? He was a really good guy. I mean, he would, on the back of his receipts, write down, and Kone can say all his injections that he would give the chickens, right? So this guy was meticulous. He followed the instructions in the Farmer's Weekly to the T. Even at a 10% margin, that's like 3,200 rand extra that's coming into him just like that. But he was making a much better margin than that. He says, you know what, I am a successful businessman now, because now his whole mental shift has changed, right? He now sees himself differently. He said, I'm going to start a business society to mentor young people who are unemployed, and so he started a mentorship society. And they said, all this chicken manure that I'm getting, I'm going to donate it to a food garden project so that they have manure. So now he's already started thinking linkages, etc. So the point of this is that it can work when people change their mindsets, and that's the sum of the story. I'm going to hand over.
Sorry. I'm afraid we're out of time because we have to get people into their workshops. So hopefully the next sessions will leave a little bit more time for questions. I'm sorry. Everybody asked the questions. Yeah, follow these guys and track them down. But if we don't get moving now, we will not get into our workshops. I'm very sorry. And you did a great job. It was great news. Thanks for your ABCD presentation. It is now time for workshops. I think you've heard about which tables the people whose names were read off were assigned to. It starts here, I think, is that table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I think there's 6 in the middle and 7. So please find your way to your tables. As you're going, tomorrow morning, the ladies from Manigingi who have their crafts will be moving downstairs. So also, around lunch or whenever there's a break, please look at their goods. This is all handcrafted stuff that they brought to show us.